Let us examine the different syntax of the useEffect hook. The useEffect hook takes in a second parameter, and that second parameter is optional, and if we specify it, it has to be an array, and it helps us to specify when to run the effect. So the second parameter is optional and it will be an array, and it helps us to specify when to run the effect. Let us discuss the different options for this second parameter. In this example over here, we haven't passed in the second parameter, so this effect runs every time the component is rendered. In this example, we have specified the second parameter as an empty array, and this means that we want to run this effect after the first render. That means after the component has loaded. In this example, we have passed in the second parameter, and it is an array consisting of count1 state variable, and this means that we want this effect to run whenever count1 changes. And in this example, we have passed count2 into the array, and this means that we want this effect to run whenever count2 changes. And similarly, in this example, we have passed in count1 and count2 into the array, and this means that we want this effect to run whenever count1 or count2 changes. An important point to note is that each of these effects, whether it is this effect or this effect or this effect, all three of them will run when the component is loaded onto the page. That means when the component is rendered for the first time. That is because irrespective of what is specified in the second parameter, like count1 over here, or count2 over here, or count1 and count2 over here, irrespective of what is specified in the second parameter, an effect will be run when the component is loaded onto the page. That means when the component is rendered for the first time. So what actually happens is this effect will run when the component is loaded onto the page and whenever count1 changes. And similarly, this effect will run when the component is loaded onto the page and whenever count2 changes. And this effect will run when the component is loaded onto the page and whenever count1 or count2 change. Another minor point to note is that effects are run in the order that they are specified in the component. So first this effect will be run, and then this effect will be run, and then this effect will be run. Let us do an example to see what we have discussed in action. This is the UI for the component that we are going to implement. The name of this component is going to be multiple counters component. We have some text at the top, and then we have a button. And when we click on this button, this value needs to get incremented. And similarly, we have some text over here, and we have a second button over here. And when this button is clicked, this value over here needs to get incremented. Let's implement this component as a function component using useState hook first. And after that, let us add the 5 effects that we have discussed earlier, like the 2 effects over here and the 3 effects over here. To implement the multiple counters component, I'm going to add a file called multiplecounters.js, and it is going to be a function component. So I'm going to write function multiple counters, and let us write a return statement as it has to return some JSX. Let's add an empty root tag, and let us close the empty root tag as well. Let us place this content in a div and this content in a separate div, and these two divs need to be separated by a line. So I'm going to add one div over here, and next I'm going to place a HR tag, and then I'm going to add one more div over here. Next, let us add our content to these divs. So we have some text you clicked 5 times. So let's add that first. I'm going to add a paragraph tag, and the text is you clicked 5 times. And below that we have a button with the label click counter 1. So I'm going to add a button with the label click counter 1. And now we need to add JSX for this content over here. We have this text you clicked 3 times. Let's use a paragraph tag for that. You clicked 3 times. And below that we have a button with the label click counter 2. So let's add a button, and the label is click counter 2. When this button is clicked, we know that this value will change, and similarly when this button is clicked, we know that this value will change. So instead of 5 over here, we have to embed a state variable. Let's call that state variable count1, and instead of 3 over here, we need a second state variable, and let's call that second state variable count2. Now let us declare count1 and count2 using useState React hook. So I'm going to write const count1 set count1 equals useState, and I'm going to pass in an initial value of 0. And similarly for count2, let's write const count2 set count2 equals use state, and let us pass 0 as the initial value for count2 as well. And now we have to write code for the event handlers for this button and this button. And within the event handlers, we'll modify the values of the state variables. So for click counter 1, I'm going to write on click equals handle click 1. And for click counter 2, I'm going to write on click equals handle click 2. Now let us define handle click 1 and handle click 2. So I'm going to write const handle click 1 equals, let's make it an arrow function, and in the function body we need to increment count 1, so we need to call set count 1. So I'm going to write set count 1, and since the new value of count 1 will depend on the old value of count 1, we need to pass in a function. So I'm going to pass an arrow function, and previous count is the parameter and the return value is previous count plus 1. And similarly, handle click 2 needs to modify the value of count 2, so we need to call set count 2. So I'm going to call set count 2 over here, and that also needs a similar arrow function to be passed to it. Let us import useState. So let's write import useState from React, and let us export the component now. Export default multiple counters, and let us go to app.js. Let us comment out the previous examples code, and let's write multiple counters over here. VS Code has automatically added the import statement for multiple counters. So now we can go and check the output. So as you can see, we have implemented the UI as per the wireframe over here. Let us click on this button and let us observe this value over here. So I'm clicking now and the value seems to be incrementing properly. Now let us click on this button and observe the value over here. And now I'm clicking on this button and the value seems to be incrementing properly for this button as well. And now let us add some effects using useEffect React hook. The effects that we will be adding are the 5 effects that we discussed previously, the 2 effects over here, and the 3 effects over here. First, let us add this effect over here. We haven't passed a second parameter over here, so we expect this effect to run after every render. So let's add this. In multiple counters.js, let us write useEffect and let us pass in a function. Let us make it an arrow function, and in the function body, let us write a console.log statement and let us write after every render. Observe that we haven't passed in a second parameter over here. Now let us go to the web page and let us open developer tools by clicking on inspect, and let us go to console. I'm going to clear the console and I'm going to put it on the right like this, and now I'm going to click on these buttons. So I'm clicking on click counter 1 now, and you can see this message got logged to the console after every render. I'm going to click on this button now, click counter 2, and you can see that this value incremented from 1 to 2. I'm going to click on these buttons a few times and you can see this value incrementing over here. This means that this message has been logged to the console 8 times till now. So whenever the multiple counters component is being rendered, this message after every render is being logged to the console. And that is happening because we haven't passed in a second parameter to the useEffect React hook over here. Let us comment out this effect now. And now let us add this effect and observe that we are passing in an empty array as the second parameter to this effect. And when we pass in an empty array, that means we want this effect to run only on the first render. That means only when the component is loaded onto the page. So let's add this effect with an empty array as the second parameter. So I'm going to write over here useEffect, and the first parameter is going to be an arrow function, and in the function body we are going to write console.log first render component has loaded, first render component has loaded, and we'll pass in an empty array as the second parameter. Observe that we have passed in an empty array as the second parameter over here. So we expect this console.log statement to be run only once, only when the component renders for the first time. That means only when the component gets loaded onto the page. Let's check the output and verify that. I'm going to clear the previous console messages and I'm going to reload the page. Please keep an eye on the messages over here. So I'm going to reload the page now, and you can see that this message got logged to the console. First render component has loaded. Now let us click on these buttons over here. I'm clicking on these buttons and you can observe that nothing is being logged to the console over here. Let me click on the buttons a few more times and you can see that these values are changing properly. That means when we click on these buttons over here, this component is being rendered, but no extra messages are being logged to the console. This message was from the first render when the component got loaded onto the page. Now let us take a look at the third effect. And in the third effect, we are passing in count1 into the array, and the message is count1 has changed. And like we discussed earlier, this effect will run when count1 changes and also when the component gets loaded onto the page. So I'm going to comment out this effect here, and I'm going to write useEffect, and I'm going to pass in an arrow function as the first parameter. And in the function body, I'm going to write console.log, and the message is going to be count1 has changed. So I'm going to write count1 has changed, and the second parameter will be an array with count1 within it. Let's go to the web page and verify what we see in the browser console. Let me clear the previous messages in the console, and I'm going to reload the page. And as you can see, when I reloaded the page, the component loaded for the first time. That means the component rendered for the first time, and this message count1 has changed got logged to the console. We haven't clicked on this button yet, and count1's value is still 0, but this message count1 has changed got logged to the console. That is because when the component gets loaded onto the page, that means when it gets rendered for the first time, all the effects specified in the component will be run, and hence this effect was run because I reloaded the page, and that caused the component to be rendered for the first time. Before clicking on these buttons, let us clear the console because this message came from the effect being run after the first render. So I'm going to clear the console now. And now let us click on these buttons, click counter 1 and click counter 2, and let us see what gets logged to the console over here. So I'm going to click on click counter 1 now, and you can see that count 1 has changed got logged to the console, and that is because the value of count 1 has changed from 0 to 1. Let me click on click counter 1 again, and you can see that the value has changed from 1 to 2. This value is showing 2 now, which means that this message got logged again. I'm going to click on click counter 1 again, and you can see that the value has changed from 2 to 3 over here, and this message got logged again because the number being displayed over here is 3. Now let us click on click counter 2 button over here and see if anything gets logged into the console over here. I am clicking on click counter 2 now, and you can see that this value over here got incremented from 0 to 5, and no extra messages got logged to the console over here. And that is because when we clicked on click counter 2, the state variable that is getting modified is count2 using setCount2, and we specified that we only wanted this effect to run when count1 got changed. Let us change count1 to count2 over here, and let us pass count2 into the array in the second parameter. So now we have count2 over here. So we expect this console.log statement to be run when count2 changes, in addition to when the component loads. So let's verify that also. Let me clear the console and let me reload the page. And as expected, the first render caused that effect to be run, and so we are seeing count2 has changed. Let's clear that, and then let us click on these buttons. So I'm going to click on click counter 1 now, and you can see that no messages got logged to the console over here. And let me click on click counter 2 now, and you can see that count2 has changed is being logged to the console when the value of count2 is getting changed, and that is because we specified count2 in the array over here. And that was the fourth effect over here. Now let us add the fifth effect where we specify both count1 and count2 within the array. So let's modify this example, and let's write count1 comma count2 in the array, and let's modify this message to say count1 or count2 has changed. Let's go to the web page and verify now. I'm going to clear the console, and I'm going to reload the page, and the first render causes the effect to be run, and we see the message. Let's clear the console, and then let's click on these buttons now. Note that I have specified both count1 and count2 in the array now. So if either count1 changes or if count2 changes, then this console.log statement will be executed. So I'm going to click on click counter 1 now, and I'm clicking a few times, and you can see that that message is being logged to the console. Count1 or count2 has changed, and I'm going to click on click counter 2 now, and you can see that the same message is being logged to the console when I click on click counter 2 as well. And that is happening because when I click on click counter 1, count 1 is changing, and when I click on click counter 2, count 2 is changing. And using the useEffect React hook, we specified that when the values of count 1 or count 2 change, we want this console.log statement to be executed. and that is what we have seen over here. Please note that we can have multiple effects. So we have one effect right now. Let us uncomment these two effects and let us go to the web page and let us look at the messages in the console. I'm going to clear the console and I'm going to reload the page. And you can see that when the component loaded, we have three messages over here. And the first message is after every render, and that came from this effect over here, where we haven't passed in a second parameter to the useEffect function. So we expect this to be run with every render. And the second message is first render component has loaded, and that has come from this effect over here. We passed in an empty array as the second parameter, which means we wanted this code to be run on first render. That means when the component got loaded, and that is why we see this second message. And the third message is count 1 or count 2 has changed, and this message came from this effect over here. Let me clear the console and let me click on click counter 1 now, and I have clicked click counter 1, and now we see two messages over here. The first message is after every render, because we know that this effect will run after every render. The value changed from 0 to 1, so this component got re-rendered, and that is why we see after every render over here. And the second message is count 1 or count 2 has changed, and this message came from this React hook over here, because the value of count 1 has changed from 0 to 1. The code within this hook did not get executed this time because the component was not rendering for the first time. If we click on the click counter 1 a couple of times, we can see pairs of messages being logged to the console over here. Let's clear the console and let's click on click counter 2 now. And I'm clicking on click counter 2 now, and we can see that pairs of messages are being logged to the console, just like we had seen with click counter 1 and count 1. These messages got logged to the console because this effect was running after every render, and this effect was running because count 2 was getting changed. I have used this counters example only to show the different syntax that are possible and how the code within the effect can be controlled by using the second parameters, like this over here or over here. The syntax is very simple and powerful at the same time, and in practice we place code to make or trigger API calls to get data from the server within useEffect React hooks. In this example, I have discussed writing messages to the console within these effects, but in actual practice the most common code we will be placing within these useEffect calls is code to make API calls to the server. For example, this effect is an ideal location to get data from the server, because any code we place over here will run when the component gets loaded and also when the state variables change. So this is an ideal location to place code to interact with the server's API. So in the next section, we will discuss how to set up an API and how useEffect will help us to interact with that API.